I've talked to dozens of COVID-19 experts over the past number of months, both interviewed them and off the record, and they give Alberta Premier Jason Kenney an F for his handling of the pandemic in Alberta. And it's pretty clear why they do that. The hospital system there is collapsing. A new poll out from Mary Canseco at Research Co. Shows that he has the lowest approval ratings in all of Canada, about 28%. Okay, that makes sense. Now, over in BC, the same experts do not give John Horgan and his NDP government an A, they give them a C. There have been lots of missteps and numbers are high and so on. And yet John Horgan has the second highest approval ratings for pandemic management in all of Canada. So there seems to be a disconnect there between what the experts think and what the BC public thinks. And I'm going to talk to Mario Canseco about that, see if he has any insight. So welcome to the interview, Mario.
Great to be here, Markham.
Well, look, I get this very long-winded introduction for which I apologize, but I really wanted to frame this because we understand why Jason Kenney has a 28% approval rating. What insights do we have into what Albertans think about his management?
Well, they've always been the lowest ranked government over the past 16 months. They had a good moment at the start of the pandemic. There was a moment when it was very similar to what we were seeing in Ontario, but they've never come close to the level of satisfaction that we've seen throughout the entire pandemic in Quebec and in BC. Now, to be at 26% is just definitely low. I mean, we had numbers where they were in the 30s at some point, in the 40s. The idea of having more than half of residents not being happy with your pandemic management is certainly troublesome for any government. But to find yourself with the support of only 1 in 4 people is definitely not where you want to be. And I think it has a lot to do with expectations. We go back to July, we go back to the actual promise of the best summer ever, the decision to open certain things. And you have a scenario where a couple of days before Canadians select their government federally, you're essentially saying, we need help, somebody needs to assist us, and we're sorry because this is something that we've mismanaged. And obviously, this is going to bring a lot of people who maybe aren't that upset with the government for other reasons, particularly because they are conservative and they are happy with other files, to essentially take a second look and say, you aren't really doing the good job here.
Now, let's talk about BC because that's where you and I both live. And I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, we thought that the Horgan government was doing a good job. And that has not been held up over the last 18 months. We've seen BC has consistently had fairly high numbers, and they've had severe outbreaks in places like the Okanagan. And yet, John Horgan, if I remember your numbers right, comes in around 62 or 63% of British Columbians think he's doing a fine job. Any insights into that disconnect?
Well, the numbers are a little bit lower than what we saw before the last BC election. At the time that the election was called, the level of satisfaction with COVID-19 management was 80%. And they ended up getting a majority government, getting almost half of voters to support them in the election. So the numbers are lower from what they were at the apex. Now, the reality here is that it's been a little bit slow for people to realize that the situation is not as great as it could be. And I think it has a lot to do with the way in which coverage has been framed. We're not Alberta, we're not doing as badly as those guys. And also the situation that we had in the early stages of this pandemic with the United States. We had a lot of coverage about how Seattle was doing, how Oregon was doing, the border is closed because they have more cases. Now the situation seems to have flipped. And it's taking a little bit longer for BC residents to realize that. Part of the situation here is there's still good command of the situation politically from the government, and they've been very careful not to be the main protagonist. I think this is one of the other problems that Jason Kenney has. He wants to be the one to tell you that it's open, then he has to be the one to tell you that it's closed, and this is why his numbers are so low.
Yeah, I'd say there's a very different approach from John Horgan and his health minister, Adrian Dix, to Jason Kenney and his former health minister, who's just replaced a few days ago, Tyler Shandro. And they were always wanting to stand up. They would be at various press conferences. In fact, they would often do the briefing instead of the chief medical officer, Dr. Dina Hinshaw. And I guess that's exactly right. Whereas Horgan and Dix have very cleverly, they let Dr. Bonnie Henry be front and center on all of this. And it certainly does lend this air of professionalism. The public health officials are in charge, and perhaps that gives the public more confidence in whether it deserved it or not, but it does lend an air of professionalism.
Well, I think it certainly helps in many ways. There hasn't been a lot of political destruction because of the cases that we've had related to COVID-19 or some of the decisions that were taken, because they've essentially allowed Dr. Henry to do everything. It's a very different situation in Alberta. It's almost like a business where you want the CEO to be out there to say things that went very, very well. And then you try to find a vice president to go out there and say the things that went very badly. It's standard way of doing things in the business world. And I think it's definitely part of the problem that we see right now with Alberta. I think, there's nothing worse than taking a celebratory lap when the race isn't over yet. And the way in which this was framed, particularly at the start of July, helped the ratings. People were going, well, if he says it's over, I think it is. And, we can go back to enjoying life the way it was. And now we find ourselves in a very awkward position of having a referendum on equalization payments in October at the same time that the Alberta government is saying to Ottawa, help us out because we can't deal with the situation that we have right now. So when they envisioned having this referendum at the same time as the municipal elections, they probably thought it would go a little bit different than this.
Now, what we're seeing in BC, Mario, is the chickens are coming home to roost in some ways. We see a big outbreak in the north. Northern patients are being flown into other health districts. We know just Nanaimo, for instance, on the island, not far from where I live, all surgeries have been canceled in the Nanaimo hospital because the COVID patients are basically taking up all the beds. And we see similar kinds of issues in other parts of British Columbia. Would you expect that a week or two of this kind of news coverage will negatively affect British Columbians' perception of how Horgan and the Horgan government is managing things?
Well, I think it certainly will. Part of the reason it hasn't yet is that we were too distracted with the federal election. You see the numbers climbing, you see a lot of things that are happening over the past month, but you're distracted with who's going to be the next prime minister, how is the situation unfolding. The next couple of weeks are going to be crucial for this because you'll find a lot of British Columbians who are now realizing that we're not doing as great as we thought we were, and that certain things that we thought we had left behind might actually be coming back. So it's definitely something that we'll watch out in the next few weeks, because the numbers are not where they should be for a government that is essentially getting 2/3 of people to say, we love how you're handling this.
So it's a case of perception having not caught up with reality yet, but the situation is so bad that reality will impinge on perceptions soon enough. Well, thank you very much, Mario. Really appreciate your insights.
My pleasure.